Well, good evening, good afternoon. I would say welcome to the last. Wow, I said the first. Welcome to the last episode of the first season of the conversation Outspoken and Opinionated. I want to first of all say thank you to everybody who's been faithful watching, everyone who's commented, who sent messages and everything. We appreciate you. Today we're going to tackle a conversation. I would say something that is very important. I think right now we have all, based on what's going on in the world and what has happened, I think we're really focusing on a lot of things that has and is affecting African Americans, blacks, women, everything. And so today we really want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I normally say DEI, but I would try to keep it to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, I have an amazing person today, someone whom I admired, someone I've grown to really appreciate being in their presence. I think she's amazing. The wealth of knowledge is like out of this world. And so it's funny because every topic you give her, she can make it. It's like one of these people who are just well rounded, and any topic that you introduce to her, she's ready to tackle it. And so without further ado, I will bring Kayce into the conversation. I say welcome. You are here.
Hello.
It's good to see you. It's good to have you. I really, really appreciate this. I want to say thank you for owning the invitation. Um, Diversity, equity, and inclusion for me is extremely important. I wanted to have this conversation because as we've moved into this Black Lives Matter and move into the Me Too and move into all these different movements that's really promoting equity, really promoting inclusion, really promoting diversity, I think the conversation is not really being had. Recently, well, for us, who like my other thing that I do is we received a memo where we can't have this conversation anymore, based on the fact that there are people who feel, there are people who feel uneasy about this conversation. So, if you can just tell the people who you are, what you do, and then we'll go straight into the conversation.
Sure. It's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. I told you like a month of Sunday. So, um, I heard your introduction and I like to under promise so I can over deliver. So, don't listen to anything that he said at all.
Love.
Um, I am a federal government employee for the most part. Outside of that, I have about 5 or 6 jobs. One of them is an EEO investigator, so I'm able to see up front and personal, like how diversity and inclusion impacts folks. I had a long history in law enforcement where I worked with victims of violent crime, parlayed that into seeing how employees were kind of treated like victims by their supervisors and management and broken systems. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, which is broken
Yeah.
systems. And then that turned into my union and labor relations work and piqued my interest that people could really work on making life better for the 8 to 10 hours that folks come to work. And that's where I've rested. So I do a lot of leadership training and leadership development, mostly because I didn't realize that people could be so bad at leadership and that you could also be taught. You can be taught to be a better leader. And so that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. Um, and that's who I am. That's kind of what my life is made up of. And yeah, I'm just glad to be here. Now, the point that you made is in reference to our lovely executive order. So I'm allowed to have this conversation right now,
Great. So you can have that conversation.
but
Okay.
I can't have it during the day.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was an executive order passed by our current president, who shall not be named. And apparently, someone from the administration sat in on a training where they were going over what really is something that you asked me the question of what DEI means to me, really embraces the notion of what it is, which is critical race theory. So it's important for everybody to actually know what the terms mean, though, because
Mhm.
I think when we say diversity, people assume that just means black and white. And where I'm from, I'm originally from South Carolina. My last name is from my husband, who's from Liberia. Uh, yeah, there's a huge Liberian connection to South Carolina and the folks in Charleston, by the way, and the Geechee speaking people.
Yeah.
But where I grew up, that's all there was black and white people and that in between. Not recognizing there was a whole other races, right? Other groups of people with different ethnic backgrounds that were right in our state, but we only acknowledge those people. So when we talk about diversity, we're not talking just about race. We're talking about color, ethnicity, nationality, religion. That's a sticky one for people.
Mm. Yeah.
Socioeconomic status, marital status, language. What language were you born speaking? What language was your first language? Your age. It includes everything that makes you different that you can't change. Think about it that way. That's what
Hmm.
diversity is. So when something is part of you that you can't change, you have to wonder why so many people would treat you differently because of it. Right? It's not
Yep.
something that you can control. Um, the E part to D&I is the equity. So a lot of people are very comfortable with diversity. They're cool. They'll say, "Hey, I've got a black friend," or, "I don't mind you speaking your native language." That's our progressive people. I usually say the word progressive is pretty dangerous because people can't see their blind spots when they call themselves progressive. Um, but that includes, you know, everyone who feels like I don't see color or I'm welcoming to everyone. That's when you say you're diverse. But equity means that not only do we have diverse people at the table, but we each have equal value at the table.
Yep.
And that's a little tricky because then we start getting into that really really naughty word called privilege,
Yep.
and whether or not people want to give that up in order to make some room for other people. And then the inclusion part has to do with what I call the fly in the bowl of milk. We always want to have representation. We'll always have somebody that makes the picture look like we are diverse. But inclusion is being authentic and having them be part of whatever it is you're working on from the very beginning. So if you bring a project to someone and say, listen, we want to have an African American celebration, and it's in a historically white institution, and you bring it to them the day before February 1st and say, hey, listen, we've planned out this African American history month, and here's where we want you to participate. You aren't being inclusive. You haven't had them in on the beginning of the process. You haven't listened to their experience or what they can bring to the table. You just want them to be part of a decorative display
Hmm.
of diversity. And so that those are the terms that we want to make sure we're all using when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion.
Thank you. Great, great, great. But moving in, I also, if we can focus, because I think by we have the definition, people should know about it. But how can people also understand the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think the only way you can understand is you want to. Now
Okay.
you have to start there,
Mhm.
wanting to understand the issue. And believe it or not, there's more people who don't want to than do, even if they say they want to. In order to understand, we have to teach people about empathy.
Mhm.
It's there's a huge number of people that ask me questions about my stance against some really crude behavior from policing in Nigeria. And I've spent quite a bit of time in law enforcement here. So they were asking me, "Hey, you look Nigerian. Are you Nigerian? Like, why do you care?" And I was like, "No, I'm not Nigerian. I'm human." So just in me being human and understanding what it means for the police to harass people and overstep their boundaries in terms of authority was enough for me to say, those are still my brothers and sisters. I could put myself in their position, and that's what empathy is. And so I'm really glad to see there's elementary schools teaching empathy
Yeah.
now. There's more and more leadership programs teaching empathy because for some reason we've lost that. We don't put ourselves in other people's shoes.
Mm.
And so we make a decision not to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think part of it is because we think we'll lose something. Um, Most people are afraid of loss, but we categorize it under the word change. So when
Mm.
you say you're making changes,
Thank
people
you.
automatically think loss.
Mhm.
But if you could convince somebody that a change is something positive, it's a gain, then they're more willing to accept it. If I said to you tomorrow, hey, listen, I won the lottery and I'm going to give you $1 million. Well, that's a change for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have $1 million?
No.
No. But you wouldn't mind that change, would you? Because there's no loss.
Exactly.
But if I said tomorrow, hey, listen, it's more than a recession that we're seeing, it's a depression and we're going to cut your pay.
Hmm.
That's a change. and that's a change you're opposed to because there's a loss there.
Yeah.
So when I the best example I can use that's most recent in terms of how to really embrace diversity is something that happened in my town. I'm the representative for people in Ward 4 in the town of Cheverly. I'm the vice mayor of the town. And there's a lot of things that happen in politics that take place before you're ever in office. And so the town had undergone this project to be included in what's called a historic district. There are some people that only want to live in historic towns. It's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily add extra value to your home, but people like buying homes with character. If you ever watch home guard television, HGTV, you'll always hear them saying, "Oh, it has no character," and that character comes from your home actually being old. So my house was built in 1948. I got an old house, and so it has just as much character as any other home in town. But in Ward 4, which is often referred to as Black Cheverly, it's where people started to trickle into Cheverly and move who were people of color. Um, Number one, our homes are undervalued, so our homes are $50,000 less than other people's homes in the town of Cheverly. But the other part to that is that we were left out of the historic district process. So they were literally drawing lines for a district that didn't include my side of town. And so my question has been my favorite question since I was 3 years old is, well, why? Why? Why are you doing that? Why? And so I asked enough questions to where the historic district said, this is a huge oversight on our part. And not only do we want to include your part of town, we're going to include the entire part of town. So they don't normally include apartments in
Okay.
historic districts, but the apartments were built in 1955. And because I said, hey, listen, why are you leaving my side of town out? They're now including all of the town, including the apartments. So I tell that story because if you think you're losing something by incorporating diversity and inclusion and equity in your life and your workspace, you're very mistaken. By
Mm,
saying that everybody gets to sit at the table, all you do is expand the pie for everybody. You don't take pieces of the pie away from everybody. And so that's something I encourage everybody to do. If you realize you get more by including more, you don't lose anything at all.
mm.
The most you'll lose is a couple more hours, more time. But other than that, all you stand nothing but to gain.
Great. So, how can we really hold our leaders accountable when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So leaders is my sweet spot. I really get frustrated with leaders everywhere because you're called to a higher purpose if you are leading a ship. And I fundamentally believe in servant leadership.
Okay.
So the first thing that you have to do as a leader is listen. There's a couple of courses that I'm bringing to our town from a group of folks in Prince George's County who do like conflict resolution. And one of the classes I'm bringing to the town for people to take advantage of is a class called Radical Listening. We do not listen to each other. It's a lost art. We listen long enough to hear what we want to say and
Hmm.
respond. We hear enough to know the bits and pieces. We hear sound bites, but we don't listen. So if people are bringing you grievances or concerns, it could be 10 years down the road before you realize somebody's been saying that to you the entire time. So that's the first step is to demand that leadership listen and teach them how if they don't know how. The next step is to really require accountability. And that's the hard part for leaders everywhere. Most people like people around them that tell them nice things.
Yeah.
You want someone around you who's going to tell you you're fabulous, you're on top of the world, you're so smart, you're articulate. But you need someone around you who's going to say, hey, your stuff is thinking. You need that person. And I call that the Nathan. Everybody needs a Nathan.
Hmm.
That's not mine. I borrowed it from a gentleman called Charlie E. But if you have biblical references, you'll get that point. Everyone needs someone to say, "Hey, no, it's you that's the problem." A great example of that if anybody can remember when Barack Obama was running for reelection, in the first debate that he had with Mitt Romney, he did terribly. It was awful. It was like Mitt Romney was beating him like he stole something. It was bad. And the reason why he did so poorly is because all he'd had around him was people to tell him he was so great. He did not know how to anticipate what someone who didn't agree with him would say. And so it's so important. That's why we have to learn to listen to each other, even when we have difference of opinions. Is you need to hear what are other people's thoughts towards you and what you're doing and your leadership style. And once we can do the listening and the accountability piece, we can teach you anything. Once you get those two down.
Okay, so I want to do a little curve because I really want to go into equity, and when I think about equity, I really think about women rights, and so looking at the trend right now, we're talking about there are a lot of women issues, but I really look at sexual harassment at work. What do you think is the issue when it comes to sexual harassment at work, also relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Mhm. Oh my, that's so multi-layered. The first thing I have to say is that women are not the only people who are sexually harassed at work. So I do have to
True,
say that.
true.
Men are sexually harassed. As a matter of fact, in terms of the CDC study, when I was in the world of victim services, they came out with a study that showed that men were actually domestic violence victims in greater numbers than women. And the service providers disagreed with the numbers so much we made them redo the actual survey. We were like, we just don't agree with that. That's not what we see. And CDC did it again. And again, they found that men are more likely to be victims. Now, I think a lot of times when we talk about male and female issues, it's really under the auspices of antiquated language.
Mm.
And so that gets really, disconcerting for my religious folks. So everybody hold on to your britches.
Yep, we're coming. We're going there. We're going to be good at
Um, so the first thing that we are really referring to is cisgendered women, which are women who are identified at birth as women.
but now they're
No, they're just identified that I'm a cisgendered woman. I was born identified as a woman.
okay.
And so we look at sexual harassment in the workplace and how women deal with that. Quite frankly, women have been completely objectified for hundreds of years. And the term objectified means literally what it sounds like. We have turned women into objects. They are not human beings. So when you have an example we used to use back in the day was there was a song by Nelly, a rapper, called Tip Drill. And in the video, he's literally taking a credit card and swiping it down a woman's backside. Now, somebody may say, you're being too sensitive. This is not a big deal. But when you turn a human being into a credit card swiper, you're less likely to have feelings for her if you smack her backside or if you rape her because she's not a person. She's just that little thing you can swipe a credit card down. And so when we turn people into objects, we don't worry about how they feel anymore. We can't empathize with them. We can't put ourselves in their shoes to think about how they feel. And when we can't do that, we can do anything to them.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it this way, it's really the objectification part applies to every part of discrimination. It's the only way that black people could be oppressed for so long in America is to continue with the ideas and notions that black people are animals. And so if I think you're an animal, it's okay for me to lynch you. You're not a human being. And so if you see how dangerous that is to objectify a human being, then you see how dangerous it is for women to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when women report sexual harassment or sexual assault, they are villainized. They are villainized for reporting. They are villainized for destroying a man, if it's the man that's a perpetrator, a man's career or potential in life. And no one sees value in that woman's life or her experiences. And so it becomes really an issue of turning people back into humans and going through that process of making sure, again, getting back to that empathy, we see people as human beings. There's another piece to women being in the workforce, though. There's two other parts to that. One is, aside from sexual assault, sexual harassment is promotion. How does a woman get promoted? Does she have to sleep her way up to get promoted? Does she have to act or take on the traits of a man to get promoted? Some women are considered the most awful supervisors or leaders in the world because they've taken on masculine traits or traits that they believe are masculine in order to move up, and they treat people horribly. And then the last part to that is really just how women treat other women. I was starting to write a book about women leaders, And it just became so difficult because when I asked people, have you ever worked for a good leader who was a woman? It was so hard to find people willing to give the interviews. There were so many negative stereotypes about women, but mostly between women and other women. How we treat each other, women. Um, it indicates that there's sort of a coddling of the oppressor. When you adopt the behaviors of the oppressor, you are just as bad
Yeah, that's
as the.
exactly.
And so when you as a woman start mistreating women, whether it's in the workplace or any place else, you're just as bad as every other man who has objectified women or treated women like they were less than human beings. You're just as
And you say that, and it just brings my mind to something. So a couple of weeks ago, I normally do like these little posts and stuff. And it was like a blog post that I did, but it came from a story where this gentleman decided to go on live and to basically disgrace his wife, stating that his wife was sleeping with a high-ranking person in their country. And so when he did went live, and for me was like I've watched it, and I stood back and I was just like, when I look at the comments, it were all women calling her whores and belittling her. I mean, cursing her. And then when I look at these women who all talk about women's rights and women empowerment, and I'm like, how in the world that you as a woman thinks that it's okay for a man to get on whatever platform it is to insult his wife and bring this woman down without you doing any investigation, and he's just stating that his wife cheated on him, and you girls are insulting this girl and doing all this kind of stuff. And then we come, and then at the end of the day, you realize you guys are talking about women empowerment. I'm like, how can you talk about women empowerment when you are a woman tearing another woman down? Like, how does that work? And so I think it comes from me. Like I said, normally it's like, guys, it's really hard when guys, and it's like I had issue with another guy for me to like, go somewhere or write a post about him and curse him and do all that stuff. Guys, most often we don't do that. Women are the first people to tear each other down. And I think we need to come to the place to really realize that, look, if we're talking about equality, we're talking about gender equality, we're talking about inclusion and all this stuff we do, I think women should start walking the walk and talking the talk. You can't be tearing another sister down, but you're talking about, I didn't get raised at my job because I'm a woman, but you there tearing another woman down because maybe she can't afford a nanny. So every time she comes to the party, she brings her child. Now you guys don't include her no more because what? She can afford a nanny. And so that for me really, really, really confuses me with how people, yeah, it really confuses me. I'm looking like, okay, you can do that. Like that doesn't connect for me because if we're talking about gender equality, it's gender equality across the board. If we're talking about equity, women's rights is across the board, no matter what it is. But I really want us to look at unknowingly men roles. This is something that I really, really, really have looked at. I have brought it up to people. I think unknowingly, or if there's lack of a better word, there are certain positions. I'm about to go to a place where some people might not like, but I'm going to take it to the place where I've spent, I would say, half of my life is in church.
Mm.
When it comes to church leaders and pastors, it's like men are supposed to be pastors. Men are supposed to be bishops. Like, how many female bishops have you seen?
So, well, Lord, 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 here we are.
So I really want us to talk about this because I don't know if it's knowingly or it's unknowingly, but I think in how I put it, in religious or religious structured organizations, I think that is where this DEI really needs to be practiced.
Ooh, I couldn't more. So much of what you have said is intertwined. So let's unravel it a little bit. Wow, that was powerful. Yes. So let's start with women being awful to women.
Mhm.
It's for the same reason that men commit the sexual assault or sexual harassment in the workplace. It's the objectification of women, but on a different level and in a different space. So the objectification of women by women is that women are supposed to be existentially moral. We believe that women are good and men are bad. We fundamentally believe that. On Father's Day, every woman in the world is a fantastic mother. and every father is in question.
Mm-hmm.
You get women getting a happy Father's Day.
That's annoying to me.
Yeah, well, okay.
Extremely annoying.
It should be for really good daddies. I had a really good daddy. But likewise on Mother's Day, you can't say anything about mothers. It doesn't matter what kind of mother you had or who you were. So we just fundamentally believe that women are better in terms of cheating, any type of moral complication. We just assume, oh, women don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that couldn't be further from the truth. One, in terms of that example you gave, we have no idea what that man has put that woman through. And that's just an assumption that there has been something else that happened there. Infidelity does not happen in a silo.
No.
So, and nobody wants to take ownership for that, but everybody's got to take this finger and point it back at them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to blame a victim in any way. Infidelity is wrong and it should be considered wrong. Should anyone outside that man's marriage make those judgments? No, that's
No.
nobody else's
That's
business.
their business.
Um, but I think that we just look at women as intrinsically being good. And so when they do bad things, we have to throw them away from society. It's such a phenomenon. We can have nothing to do with them. And especially because of cognitive dissonance, which is if she can do that and I'm a woman, I have to completely distance myself from her because there's no way in the world I could do that. Well, I got news for you. Unless you've been put in a situation where none of your needs are met, and it's been long term, you have no idea what you would do. You don't know. And that's something, honestly, it takes being in that situation. Sometimes empathy is not something that could be derived. Sometimes experience is what you have to learn from. Um, so now we move from this moral objectification of women to how men see women. Women are supposed to be nurturers and mothers, but we are not actually supposed to enjoy, I'm going to say a really bad word on your show, sex. So the fact that there was an affair in the first place means there's an anomaly about this woman because the assumption is affairs are about sex.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's fast forward, package that all up into the church. You're talking to the daughter of a Baptist preacher
Okay.
who spent most of her life in Pentecostal church, the first church where I ever went to. I will not name their name. Um, we, as a choir, went to a visiting church, and we left the church before we sang because my bishop said there was a woman that walked through the pulpit. She walked through the pulpit to leave a beverage for the pastor. She didn't stay there. She wasn't preaching, but she walked through. And she, as a woman, should not have even walked through the pulpit. She should have leaned over the podium and left the beverage instead of walking through. Because her presence as a woman defiled the pulpit, our entire church and our choir of 40 some people got back on the bus before we sang and drove back to our home church. Can you imagine the impact on every little girl and every woman that learns that there's something so filthy about their very presence going into the pulpit that it would cause such a ruckus? So we want to have to take ownership for really some of the challenges that women face in understanding who they are in their place. There's so many confusing messages that we send women. If you're a white woman, we tell you you're a princess from the day you're born and you should be treated like a queen. If you're a black woman, we tell you life will not be easy for you and you need to learn how to figure out to make how to make it in the world. If you are an Indian woman, and these are stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
If you're an Indian woman, we tell you you've got no voice, you'll get married to who we tell you get married to. Now, those are old time stereotypes that we know no longer apply to who we are as human beings any longer. But the one institution that keeps applying those stereotypes is the church.
Church. Yep.
It is the church. And we can apply that concept to politics. When people ask, is America ready for a woman
Female.
president?
That drives me insane. How progressive can we be in asking that question?
My question is, what do you think a woman would do to the United States? Like, what would a woman do to the country? A lot of people are really concerned about biological parts of women. Like women
Mm.
have periods,
Yeah.
and so they're unstable. And really, we know that, quite frankly, that that's just not true. It's just a matter. I mean, literally, this is just a matter of your body saying, "We're not using this egg this month."
So
Okay,
let it go.
that's it. There we, it's just that we have
That's
made
that
this
simple.
complicated.
Yeah.
I think that the problem, and oh Lord, I can't see anybody, and I think this is a good thing. The
Mhm.
problem with, particularly in the Christian faith, is that we don't like doing the work of actually being Christians.
Mm.
Because the work of actually being Christians is really looking at the word for what it says. When God says he made man in his image, if I was somehow created in his image, then that means God is all woman just as much as he's all man.
Amen.
So if God is all woman just as much as he is all man, why would I not be able to walk in the same authority that any man does, that any God that my God does? Why wouldn't I? Most importantly, let's say, because people love the scripture, a woman is a weaker vessel. Let's say, like, we use that and we misinterpret it as much as people do, and we say I'm a weaker vessel. Okay, but again, in the Christian faith, we say no weapon formed against me shall prosper. I am more than a conqueror. Greater is he that is in me.
Meaning he is in the world.
So if we believe those things, then it doesn't matter whether if I'm a girl or a boy, a man, a woman, hermaphrodite. If he's in me, greater is he that is in me. If I choose to believe in Christ, then his authority and power works through me,
Mhm.
which means I'm equal
Yep.
to him working through you. And the last thing I'll say about that point in terms of the church is you have to really look at how purposeful and intentional God is in the language that he uses in the Bible. He says, if you all don't praise me, the rocks will cry out. Well, at some point, I have to be worth more than a rock as a woman, right?
Yes, I
Right.
agree.
So if a rock can end up having power, there's no greater power than praise, because that's where God sits down in our presence. If a rock can sit and praise God because no one else will, assuredly a woman can do the same and
Exactly.
have some level of authority. Now that is pretty, and I hate to say that that's myopic because I'm talking about my experience as a Christian. We
Mhm.
know that women are also considered lesser in other religions as well, and unfortunately, I don't know that that will ever change. When we look at, let's go back to women in the workplace. 1963, we had the Equal Pay Act. This is the United States Supreme Court saying if a woman and a man have the same job, you should pay them the same. From 1963 to 2009, we have the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which is again the United States Supreme Court saying if a woman and a man have the same job, you have to pay them the same. Why do you have to keep making an act for me to get paid the
Hey.
same? And I'm still not paid the same. I vividly remember my first experience going to school. I graduated early from high school. I went to college when I was 16 years old. And the following year, I became assistant manager of a private company. And I learned that my male counterpart, who was the assistant manager, had never been to school and he really wasn't able to hold down a job. He had some chronic illness. He was 35. I was 17. I found out that Frank, my coworker, was making $20,000 more than me. So I asked my supervisor, I said, "Hey, Mike, why is Frank making more money than me?" And he said, "Oh, well, Frank has a family." That's what made me realize that the assumption that a man has to be the breadwinner is supported by breaking the law. We are so willing to follow this construct that we've created, which is that a man must make more money than a woman and be a breadwinner, that you completely remove the fact that he doesn't have any more experience than I do. He doesn't have any more education than I do. In fact, I had more. But because he had to go home and be the man in his house, he gets paid $20,000 more than I do. And that was really my first taste of seeing it in the workplace as a 17-year-old.
Mm.
Um, he never asked me, "Hey, do you pay your mom's mortgage or do you pay for your brother's private school fees?" Because those are things I was paying for at 17. He never once asked me, "Did I have a family?" It was just the assumption that Frank's family was more important in terms of him being the breadwinner because he was a man. So, yeah, in every walk of our lives, women are devalued and relegated as second class citizens.
And since you're talking about this, I was reading something the other day and it just blew my mind. And I just want to share with those who are watching. I want people to understand. There's a statement that a lot of people say, and they say, "Oh, women need men, and a woman cannot keep a man, and so she's downplayed because she can't keep a man." But I just want to let people know, when those statements were made, those were back in the days where women didn't work. Women didn't do nothing, so they needed to keep a man. They needed to have a man because guess what? He paid the bills, he took care of the house, he took care of the kids. But now we're in 2020. So when you think that you can say to a black woman, or you can say to another woman that, oh, she can't keep a man or whatever, she don't need to keep a man because she's doing everything she's supposed to do. So that phrase, it really irks me in the wrong way when people say, oh, she can't keep a man. I'm just like, what do you mean she can't keep a man? Like, both of them are in a relationship, ain't working dudes. But still, I just had to say that. I don't know. It just came in my head. I'm like, I just need to say that. I think somebody watching might need to understand that is, oh, stop telling women that. That's just annoying. But anyway, my mom told me a story and I just want to share it. She was the first person to bring a certain alcoholic beverage to Liberia. She was 25 years old and she was on a plane going to a different country. And there was these business guys talking about this alcoholic beverage. And she's like, what are they talking about? When they went to the lounge, she was talking about it. She started talking. They're like, hey, we just heard about this new company. We're going to Sierra Leone to bring this ticket to Sierra Leone. And she's like, oh, I'm Liberian. She was, well, my mom grew up in England, so she had a British accent. So they're like, no, you. So it like, well, easier for them to connect with her because of Sierra Leone. So they were like, oh, great. And she says, so they talk about it. She didn't go to where she was going. She went to the counter, changed her flight, and followed them to Sierra Leone. Got there, worked with them to unload this thing in Sierra Leone. The guy said, like, do you want a ticket to Liberia? She said, yes. My mom said the backlash that she got from people as a young woman selling alcohol. She said she couldn't understand that because she said, okay, first of all, I'm 20-something year old. She said, I was smoking, I was doing my own thing, living my own life and doing everything for myself. Why is this a problem? She said she would get up in the morning and go to her distributors to, like got it in the pickup truck and deliver her drinks and stuff like that to the little places, bars and nightclubs. And people, they were like, don't you, we think you need a man. When you come here to deliver these things, and she looking at me like, what's going on? And so just from that, I bring it now into 2020 and women who I was having a conversation, one of my mentors, I having a conversation with her, and she actually is she's like a big wheel in one of these really huge companies. And she was telling me the first time she became an executive, she had actually that quarter, her team had actually brought in over $4 million. It was serious in the company and everything. So she's going into her annual review with the CEO, like, they're going to praise her and everything. And she going there, he's like, oh, your numbers are great. Everything is good. But I just want to tell you, you wear a lot of bright colors. And she's like, what? Oh, and another thing is you're too motherly. And she says she sat there and she's like, okay, I have brought in this amount of sales to this company. My team is working hard and all he can see is that I wear bright colors or I'm too motherly. And she said, what am I supposed to do? And she was like, and I quit. I left the company. I was like, this was not for me. And so it's like, it's just ridiculous how women are treated a certain way. And people, I don't know if it's, like I said, I don't know if it's knowingly or it's unknowingly. It just happened.
I think that it's both. We talk about your mother's situation. That gets back to that objectification of moral people.
Yeah.
Moral people don't drink.
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely don't peddle alcohol. Oh my goodness. I'm surprised they didn't cast her down into hell. So that there was that objectification there, but then there's also this piece about the standards for women, which are number one, unattainable, but two, just impossible in general. So an image came to mind while you were talking. which is this picture of a singer, and I forget his name, standing next to Beyonce. And they're on the same album. It's not Your Body Is Your Wonderland. There's some song he's singing, and I can't remember what his name is. But he's grungy. He's got holes in his pants. He just looks awful. And then she's standing there, and then in this badly Mishka gown that's $10,000. And you can clearly see the expectation for a woman is that she has to look like this,
Mm-hmm.
be slim and trim and always on her A game. While this guy looked like he rolled out of bed, and he's still getting the same accolades as Beyonce. Our expectations for women are far greater than any man's. I mean, we see that in examples across the board. I commend your friend for saying I quit, because the only thing when I'm talking about sales in any company should be what's in black and what's in red.
Mm-hmm.
Who brought in the money and who didn't. That should
Yep.
be your focus. And whether or not I'm too motherly, that might have been a technique that I used in order to make those $4 million. You don't know. Um, and then the bright colors. Men can wear anything.
Oh,
Hopefully they've showered for the day, but I mean, like, they can wear anything to anywhere. What was fascinating me was learning that khaki pants and a blue sports coat is considered formal wear.
oh, yeah, it's formal. Yeah,
For
that's formal.
But
Very formal.
women are expected to be decked down in sequins. Like, women can't wear vibrant clothing, especially in a European setting or an American setting, because it's attention drawing or attention seeking. And again, we still hold on to that belief that women are to be seen but not heard.
Or,
And if you're wearing bright colors, the likelihood is you've got something to say. Now
mhm,
that you've been seen and people want to hear from you, you stepped out of your place.
mhm.
And that phrase is the most dangerous phrase to all of us, which is stay in your place.
Yeah, stay in your lane.
Everybody, stay in your lane. Everybody should belong everywhere.
And you say that is funny because I remember fresh out of college, my first job, yeah, I had the opportunity because the program that I work with was affordable healthcare within the county that I live in. And so being that Obama was doing that, my company, they were like, so they were looking for people who were doing that. And so I was going to represent my company. And I remember being in a team meeting and my supervisor, but not my direct boss, my supervisor, who was a Caucasian lady, said, "Oh no, being that they're sending you to this meeting or sending you to this organization, we just want you to understand that you're going and you're representing the company, so you should really stay in your lane. You shouldn't say too much and don't talk too much." And I looked at her and said, "What do you mean?" Because I didn't understand what she meant. And her boss, who was our main boss, was like, "Yeah, what do you mean?" Like, what do you mean? And she's like, "Oh, we just want you to just be careful what you say because we don't want any backlash, that will come and hurt the company." I was just like, okay, well, in my back of my mind, I'm like, is it because I'm black? That's why, I should be very careful because I might say something out of the ordinary. But I just feel it's just like we don't understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. It's a huge problem in companies. And I think the fact that people, yeah, we have Black Lives Matter, everybody talking about it, but there are other things that we also need to set in place so that everybody can feel at home. You get instances where people who, like for us, who come from a different country, I come from West Africa, I come to the States, and I wear to wear my tribal clothes. That's a problem for some company. They don't really take into consideration when they said, "Oh, like I've been told, oh, I really like it when you wear regular clothes." And I'm like, now what is regular clothes? So in your environment that you live in, because how has the DEI been established or erected? How are you guys working on that in your environment?
So, it's part of me, so I live and breathe it. Um, it starts in my home. I married a West African, and it was not until the day that I got married that I realized that I basically am in an interracial relationship, because West Africans do not see me as black. They see me as a black American, and that to them is different
Mm-hmm.
than being black. Um, it started with me learning, like, my husband, God bless his soul. had never even heard of Jim Crow until he met me. And when I say that, that doesn't point to any ignorance on his part whatsoever. We don't teach
Huge.
African American history. African American history. We don't teach that in America. So if we don't teach it here, I can rest assured that most people outside of America have not heard of all of the plights of African Americans. And so he made a comment once while we were watching a show, and he's like, I think you guys might be too sensitive. And of course, Ever the educator, we took about 3 or 4 hours to talk about why I was not being too sensitive. So it starts at home and educating the people in your home. Unfortunately, all Black people, I don't care where you're from, have to have the talk with their children.
Mhm.
How you make it home if the police stops you. That's why the Black Lives Matter piece is so important. Now, I've said Black Lives Matter to people at my church, which is mostly African, and gotten pushback, where people want to know, why does that matter, or why should we be saying that here? And I've tried my best to convey that it's actually unchristlike for you to refuse to acknowledge that my life has equal value and deserves protecting, just like everybody else's. Because if he sees us all the same, we should see each other all the same.
Mhm.
So it starts in your home, and then for me, it moved to my space of where I worship. And then this is actually my work. I have the best job in the world. I get to talk about this all the time with work. I don't get to use the critical race theory anymore until we get a new president. But and I just think what's fascinating and mind-boggling to me is how much money we've wasted, how
Mhm.
much talent we've wasted. Somewhere, somebody has the cure for cancer, and they might be a little Black girl. And because she's a little Black girl, she may not get the accurate resources or what she needs to become the person that lets us know that she's got the cure for cancer. We are hurting ourselves by refusing to be equitable and inclusive. Um, and so I just think to myself, billions and billions of dollars have been spent because we don't treat each other like we are all the same. And it reminds me of one of my favorite preachers in the world, thought leaders, and also phenomenal in terms of the leadership space too. So even if you're not Christian, he's really great to listen to if you like learning or hearing about leadership. And unfortunately, he's passed, but that's Miles Monroe. And Miles Monroe tells this story about how he got really angry. He grew up in Bainstown in the Bahamas, which is a very poor section, and he talked about sleeping on the floor with rats and rodents and bugs. And he was Christian. He calls out to God. He's really angry. And he says, God, I'm mad at you. I'm angry because, you made me poor. And everybody that I see that has wealth is white. And he says that he heard from God. And God said to him, I don't make rich people. I don't make poor people. I just make people. And if we can apply, that very thought, God didn't make us as rich or poor. That's something we did with our systemic racism and our constructs. God didn't make us as black and white. I was given a training to South Africa the other day, and I had to talk to them about how my job in 2014 was to desegregate a high school in Cape Town, South Africa. I went there for a month and a half and worked with the headmaster and all of the teachers to talk about how they could actually have Black students come to their school and still
In
have,
South Africa.
in South Africa, and still have equal value. And there it was really critical, and it was challenged. It's a public school. So the government was saying, hey, y'all ain't got no Black kids in this school. And the school is saying, we're not racist, but because of apartheid, we can't find kids who have had the tools they need to be at the same level as these kids. And
Mm.
so figuring out how do you work that problem of systemic racism, which has created real issues with education and fairness. What does that look like? That's the equity piece. How does it look to be fair in this situation without creating a school that's no longer award winning? And I had to talk about how I got off the plane and somebody told my coworker, "You look like a colored girl from Elsie's River." Well, colored for me from South Carolina means something completely different. Colored there is an actual subset of a race. And so, You think about how much work and effort has been put into separating us and categorizing us and putting us where every place fits, and we don't ever neatly fit there. Part of the reason why racism doesn't work is because a white woman can have a black child. It may be rare. It may have people looking at that woman strange, but two white people can birth a black child because no pure person exists. There is no pure person. There is no one who can say, I'm 100% Aryan, no matter how much they try. And I can tell you that because scientists have proven that the original man is a black man.
Man.
Black is the only color that has every color in it.
Hmm.
And so I don't care how far down the line you get, any of us can create a living being that doesn't look anything like us. And that's really how God intended it.
Yes.
And so when we just look at that whole construct that we've created, if we could eliminate it, if we could throw it all in trash, if we could say race does not exist anymore, at least that one. I know it will take a lot. Nobody was going to embrace the concept that gender doesn't exist. But I'm gonna drop this in here, and I'm gonna step my toe, and I'm gonna step back out.
Okay.
Okay, this is my toe stepping in. I had to stop and think that because I was born cisgendered a woman, my paycheck was $20,000 less, and I had nothing to do with me being born a woman. I had nothing to do with it. And God doesn't see me as a woman or a man. He just sees me as the being that he created who accepted him. Then why are we seeing anything else, including gender? I'm going to step my toe back out.
Okay.
Okay. That's I'm step my toe back out of that conversation. But just food for thought.
And it's true, but we'll leave it at that. But there's a quote that I like that really I like when it comes to diversity is nobody can beat you being you.
Mhm.
Nobody can beat you being you. And I think when people start to embrace themselves and embrace your blackness and all that stuff, it gives you a different perspective about life. When I know that, like someone said one time, I don't see black. And I said, that's the problem. Because when I walk up, the first thing you should see that I'm black. So if you don't see my color, then you don't see me. So then we can have the conversation because what do you see when you see me walking up to you? But I think, and just looking at different studies and stuff like that, something that has really, really affected me since I came to this country, because this is where I started to use this. When you go into the bathroom, they have the hand soap machine. The hand soap machine never works for me when I do my hand like this, when I put my hand out, because my skin is dark and it's not made to recognize dark skin. But when I turn my hand around and do this, it works. And I showed that to my son, and he was like, oh, wow. And I say that because those are things that happen, and people don't really take that into consideration. CCTV. If you've ever had an opportunity to watch a CCTV and there are black people, it's distorted. But when you watch it with white people, it's very clear. You can see them. Those are things that I think companies don't see, companies don't take into consideration. That those are things that I think that's where these things needs to come in. If we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, how the hell I'm going to be working for you, go in the bathroom, and I put my hand in, the water don't come out if I use the bathroom? Like, that don't make no sense. But it's because we haven't stepped into these environments where we can really let people know that when you're creating something, you need to know that there are going to be different shades of people coming in this place. And so everybody needs to be included. And with that said, I want to ask this question to you. So what are your thoughts on companies
Mhm.
who are taking away diversity groups and go into mainstream, or they're talking about let it just blend in?
So your point is so huge. That's so powerful. Let's talk about that and blending in.
Mhm.
Um, on that flight back from South Africa, the flight from here to South Africa is like 23 hours or something like that.
It's like
A
23,
really
almost
long time.
hours, almost a day.
I got lifelong friends from that. Like, if you spend a day with somebody, you should get to know them. The
Mhm.
guy sitting next to me was a makeup artist. And he said his industry was really, this is 2014, 6 years ago. His industry was really taken off as a South African makeup artist. He said because Black women in Africa are learning that they are considered beautiful too. And all before, makeup industries weren't making things that match their skin because Why would anybody think a black woman was beautiful?
Yeah.
And I was just like, gosh, that's mind boggling. Like, no one else has a point of reference for what it means to not have beauty, like to exist with no beauty. But if you think those examples are futile, let's look at more dangerous situations. The DC sniper was able to continue killing people for as long as he was because they were searching for a white man.
Yep.
Because their assumptions and their profilers were that black people don't do this. There's a safety issue. And I think that's what this last election should have shown us, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
There's a public health risk to racism. And there is a serious safety issue in terms of homeland security and domestic terrorism when it comes to not acknowledging that there's more than just the blending. No, there's a makeup brand now called Ochre. They were created just for Asian people. If you're black, they don't want you buying their brand because I don't know what it's like to be an Asian woman looking for the color that matches my skin.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what our role is to be intentional. The intentionality of saying no. I do see you as a black man, and I'm
Yep.
going to tell you something. I've been taught to fear you walking down the street, and I'm going to be intentional about the fact that I'm not moving when I see
Mm-hmm.
you. I'm
Yep.
not flinching. I want you to know that you are welcome and included on this sidewalk just like anybody else. And I'm going to be purposeful about how I include you because you've been excluded for so long. This is a saying that I got from someone who was running for office in our town, and it was just so amazing to me. She said, when you've gone out of your way to be exclusive, then you should go just as much out of your way to be inclusive.
Inclusive.
So the blending does not get you off you're still responsible. We started with empathy and accountability.
Yep.
You cannot be accountable if all you want to do is blend. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because people are still people, right? We're talking about mostly color. But
Mm-hmm.
if I bring you a Puerto Rican and an El Salvadorian and somebody from Spain that are all the same color, you don't have to do any blending. Their culture is so different, vastly different. You got somebody who's closer to Europe than South America.
Yeah.
You got somebody whose climate is completely different. I can't expect all those people to act the same just because they all would fall under the category of Hispanic. You can't do that. You have to see the individual for who they are. And I thank God that we are individuals. The one thing that I think is so funny is how much Christians push against science. I love science. You know what science shows you? Science shows you that there's not one other human being in life that has your fingerprint.
Yep.
There's not one other human being in life, unless you are a twin or a multiple, that has your exact DNA composition. And even they don't have the
They
exact
don't have the
composition,
exact. Yes.
it's just similar. And so, what does that tell us? If we be intentional about individuality and inclusivity, we're only scratching the surface to what we can do. I love that Dr. Fauci came out and said, "Hey, listen, this is who created this vaccine. She looks like some of you."
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I could
there's
have went to college with her.
a wonderful. There
Yeah.
there would still be some distrust in the community because of historical issues,
Mm-hmm.
but I think if nothing else, it shows people, hey, they said that girls aren't good at math. You got to be good at math to be good at science. They said that black women don't like STEM, and here's a black woman who just created a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
This knocks out every stereotype we've ever seen. And if we just let ourselves welcome and include and be equal, we shouldn't have the problems that we have. I
Oh.
love listening to Lauren Hill, despite all her challenges. And she just said this. She was on a show with Isaiah Thomas. She's like, we've got if let's take it from scripture, and I apologize, my references are Christian, because I am a Christian. But let's look at scripture. It's God that said, "Let me go down to the town of Babel and confuse their language before man is able to achieve what he set his mind to." Has anybody stopped to think how powerful man is? Anything you set your mind to, you can
You
actually
can
do
do
it.
it. Yep.
If you couldn't do it, God would not have involved himself to say, let me go confuse them. He knew they could reach heaven if they wanted to. And if you think about the power that is in us as humans, we shouldn't have starvation. There should be no poverty. We should be on higher level higher level thinking, higher level problem solving issues now. We should have cars flying to the moon, but because we've got so bogged down in this nonsense, which isn't even real,
Mm.
we've stymied our own growth and development.
And just you talking about that, and I remember just having I've had I always have internal conversations, and so I was at work because I work at the NIH, and we at work, so we watch these things, and I'm watching it, and I see Kezi, and I see, but if you look at that picture, there are all older Caucasian men with this one black girl in the back of these old Caucasian men who did this research and who was the one who invented this. And in that moment, I don't know if everybody noticed it, but in that moment, she was still not recognizable as she is supposed to be compared to the white older men that were standing up there with her.
It
And so
took the white man acknowledging her.
for us to acknowledge
Yes.
her,
Yes.
because the press, nobody asked her questions, nobody focused on her until he made a comment and said who she was. Then everybody started to talk about her, and people want her here and calling her there and all that kind of stuff, when it was already said, because she was the head of the lab. If you just want to line and see what lab it was, you would know who's the lab leader. But I think it's because we have still, like I think you probably said, we have still giving these we are still giving these people the opportunity to tell us who we are. So it's until we can change our mind. I think this is like a whole mind changing process. Until we can change our mind and really walk into this and realize that, like, who we are, what we say, this is I am, and I just gonna deal with it. And it's just me. You're just going. Your interpretation of me and how you feel about me is not my business. That's your problem. This is me, and let's do this. But you have been amazing. This has been an amazing conversation. I am super pumped. I say thank you so much for accepting this. But before you go, I got one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is very, very uncomfortable, and we should, I think that's, let's be honest about it. It is uncomfortable to have this conversation. How can people start this uncomfortable conversation?
Well, I'm gonna say something that's unpopular with Black people. I'm gonna start with my own people. Um, be open to someone being your ally, and as frustrating as it may be, don't make them do all the work. Don't do their work because it's work,
Mhm.
right? But don't make them do all the work. If someone's coming to you and they want to be an ally and they want to have these conversations, be open to it. That it should be said on the other end. If that's you, if you're someone who has experienced privilege and accept that, and you're ready to have these conversations, and maybe you are white, you need to recognize that in asking someone to engage, you are uncovering whether or not it's been fully acknowledged as a reality post traumatic slave disorder for an
Mhm.
African American. There's anger in knowing from the day of birth that you are of lesser value according to society. And so you're asking questions, maybe a sensitive thing. You may have to take it in small bites. The most important thing to do is to take the step and try. If you don't have the conversation, nothing will change. And as you can see, we are more polarized than ever. And it's really destroying not just our country, but the whole world. We've got a whole lot more that we could be doing other than tearing each other down and falling apart. We willing to have the conversation. The other part to that that's really important when you're having that conversation is to accept somebody's truth. You'll never see me make comments about someone who's from the LGBTQ population. I never make comments about transgender people. You know why? I've never woken up and felt like God put me in the wrong body. So I can't speak to anybody else's experience. I don't have the right to. I can tell you what the Bible says all day long. That one I can do. And I can tell you whether I believe that that's true, whether I think it's right or wrong. But I don't have the right to speak to somebody else's experience. If somebody is telling you what they've experienced, They have no benefit in lying to you. If I tell you that I woke up every day until I was 13 years old and lived next door to the KKK, lived on a dirt road, which my future husband would laugh at, and I had to be like, "There's no dirt roads in Liberia. Are you serious?" Um, Lived on a dirt road, and I walked a mile, literally, not a Cosby story. I walked a mile to the bus stop. My neighbor was the Red Dragon, Grand Dragon of the KKK. He cared enough about my life that he would get in his car. We didn't have a car, and he would ride next to me to make sure nobody would hurt me. We lived next to a truck stop. And he would sit in his car until the school bus came. He cared enough to make sure nobody kidnapped me, raped me, nobody hurt me. But when it was raining, I was a little black girl and I could not get in his car. Now, I have no reason to tell you that story or make it up. It's not fiction. It's important that you say that's that person's story and that makes up the fabric of their lives. You accept it as true. So if I tell you, hey, every time I go to the grocery store, someone of Nigerian descent cuts me off and they're mean and nasty to me, I don't have any reason to tell you that other than that has been my experience. And know that I may have decided to create some stereotypes about Nigerian people based on that experience. It requires me being an educated individual to say, not all Nigerians are like that. It requires you saying, not all African Americans
Mhm.
are like that. Not all white people are like that. So, being accountable, being empathetic, accepting people's truths. Those are the three key things that you have to take away in order to really do this the right way.
Well, guys, for those who are watching, I will say thank you. This was the conversation, outspoken and opinionated. My guest was Mrs. Kayce Munyeneh. She is the vice mayor of the town of Cheverly and also a council member of Ward 4. And she does diversity, inclusion, and equity for a living. So, hey guys, if you do want to reach out to her, you want to get people, you want some sort of training because you know you have small business or you have a big business, whatever it is that you want to do, or you just want your organization, or even maybe your family to get to understand this and realize, because you know there's intermarriage, there are a lot of things going on, and you want to know because there's certain things that you can do in my household that probably they do in their household. And we'll just start this conversation so that our kids and our kids can really understand who they are, where they're from, and where they're going. So again, I said this was the last episode of my season 1 the conversation. I want to thank all my guests that have been on the show. I want to say all my friends, everybody who supported me, who've been texting and messaging and Instagramming. I love you guys, and we'll be back in spring of 2021. Have a good evening. Bye bye.